Why National Security Advisor's advice to IPS probationers is worrying. It failed to recognize that civil society and human rights are fundamentally linked. National Security Advisor of India Ajit Doval. It was a salutary event when the National Security Advisor addressed the IPS probationers at the passing out parade at the National Police Academy, Hyderabad on 11th November. Ajit Doval made the following striking points. 1. People cannot feel safe and secure if law enforcers are weak, corrupt and partisan. 2. The implementation of laws is more important than their legislation. 3. The quintessence of democracy does not lie in the ballot box. It lies in the laws made by the people who are elected through those ballot boxes, which effectively means the party in power, the BJP. 4. Wars are no longer an effective instrument for achieving political or military objectives. Then comes the knockout punch, but it is the civil society that can be subverted, suborned, that can be divided to hurt the interest of a nation. And you, IPS probationers, are there to see that they are fully protected. The last bit in this potholed oration left some of us old-timers scratching their dandruffed scalps. The focus was not on those suborned TV channels spouting fake news, putting a slant on almost every national event. It was on those people in India who were hellbent upon subverting the nation. Are there such people? Of course there are, some indoctrinated right-winger will say, pointing to, we all know whom. The basic point the NSA made, namely that police must implement laws honestly and impartially, is unexceptionable. He did not nudge the door open for a larger debate. The state and its laws, its entire constitutional structure, was subverted from the top during Indira Gandhi's emergency. The judiciary, like a lamb, complied. Civil rights, now termed human rights, and civil society are interrelated. Civil society consists of individuals who have an opinion on matters affecting them, and they critique the state and government. Civil rights and civil society are the ballast, the foundation on which liberal philosophy stands. Civil disobedience is an example of concretizing the dissenting assertion against the aggression of the state. It would be worth our while to remember Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian philosopher, who opined that it was allowable to, if not incumbent on every man, to enter into measures of resistance, when the probable mischiefs of resistance appear less to him than the probable mischiefs of obedience. Is the police guilty, as seen in Hathras, of mischiefs of obedience? With states becoming more aggressive and omnivorous, the need is to protect civil society from depredations of the state. The state, through its laws, has made many people stateless. One could call them non-persons. A majoritarian state can pass a slew of laws bearing on individual rights and liberty. Didn't Mrs. Gandhi talk incessantly of a committed bureaucracy? The present dispensation wants a committed police. Uma Bharti, ex-Union Minister and formerly Chief Minister Madhya Pradesh, stated recently that the bureaucracy was just fit to carry the slippers of politicos. However abhorrent the statement, it reflects a strain of thinking in the establishment. So we have a situation where the right wing concentrates on the police, which faithfully carries out orders. We must take heed of the number of police encounters in UP. Another statement by the NSA needs pondering over. The implementation of laws is more important than their legislation. What if laws themselves are bad? 3 farm laws are being repealed. In fact, the NSA's admonitions are singularly ill-timed. And what if the implementation is too zealous? Have we forgotten the emergency and the forced vasectomy of rickshaw pullers? The offensive portions of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA, have been used against people like Kobad Gandhi and late Father Stan Swami, who died in jail. This draconian law has no clause for anticipatory bail, and the minimum punishment prescribed is 5 years. This is the aggressive state in action. There are also old laws like Section 124A of the IPC that penalizes sedition, something the police has made great use of. That was, of course, the colonial state in action. India ranks 142 out of 180 in the Global Law Index due to the draconian and colonial laws that still exist, according to the former Justice of the Supreme Court, Rohinto Nariman. India is close to the bottom of the list. Before government functionaries enter debates on state power and individual liberty, one would recommend the study of the salutary judgment the Delhi High Court delivered on 15th June this year. On the bail plea of the Pinjara Todd activists, Natasha Narwal, Devangana Kalita, and student leader Asif Iqbal Tanha, who had been in jail for 13 months, the court granted them bail and made certain stringent observations. In sum, it said that in a bid to stifle dissent, the state blurs the line between the constitutional right to protest and terrorism. Talking of the UAPA, the bench of eminent justices Siddharth Mridul and Anup Jairam stated the more stringent a penal provision, the more strictly it must be construed. But charge sheets are filed blithely. The justices also called attention to little evidence, but alarming hyperbole verbiage against the wronged activists. Civil society expects steadiness, not bonanzas from the state, which doles out 5-year tenures for chiefs of CBI and Enforcement Directorate. 4 days before superannuation, an officer is made DGP Delhi. The CBI office was subjected to a midnight raid at the chosen hour when the CBI itself raids others. The Secretary General of the Rajya Sabha was moved out after 2 months to accommodate PC Modi, an IRS officer. This is almost anarchy. And lastly, Doval could have emphasized wider reading by IPS probationers before one day they, like their seniors, put a floundering foot into issues beyond their ken. CJI's remarks on a different accountability yardstick for judges is worrying. Kartikeya Tanna writes, in a recent speech he stated that the framers of the constitution made accountability integral to legislature and executive, while putting the judiciary on a different pedestal. Chief Justice of India, N.V. Ramana, attending the Constitution Day celebrations organized by the Supreme Court Bar Association, SCBA. Addressing an audience on the occasion of Constitution Day on 26 November, Chief Justice of India, N.V. Ramana read out his views from what seemed to be a prepared text. The Constitution's framers, he said, made accountability integral for the legislature and executive. However, he went on to claim, they deliberately decided to keep the judiciary on a different pedestal. Why? It is because, he surmised, the framers trusted the competence of men and women who would adorn the bench in upholding the Constitution. The choice of words in the prepared text, problematic as they are, could have been overlooked had the overall tenor of his speech conveyed a different message. It didn't. And that is clear from a point he went on to make at the event. Expressing concern over the increasing attacks on the judiciary in the media, in particular social media, he asked that central agencies effectively deal with what appear to be sponsored, synchronized, and malicious attacks. What the CJI was effectively saying is that governments which, as he said, are accountable, should create a safe environment so that judges who are on a different pedestal in regard to accountability can adorn the bench fearlessly. At the outset, it is useful to mention that judges are accountable under our Constitution because they can be removed in certain situations. Article 124(4) mentions the procedure to be followed in case of removal of a Supreme Court judge on the grounds of proved misbehavior or incapacity. Article 217 follows the same for High Court judges. Indeed, while the members of the legislature and the executive, which is carved from the legislature, have to be elected by the voters every 5 years and, therefore, do face the risk of rejection, judges don't go through the same voting process. Also, the courts not only have the powers to adjudicate legal disputes brought before it but even strike down laws passed by the legislature, which go against the Constitution. Over the years, however, the Supreme Court has given itself powers into critical areas which do not find any reference in the Constitution. Oddly, both these powers seem to serve one purpose: perpetuation of the pedestal adorned by their lordships. First, in regard to the appointment of judges, the SC itself has diluted the plain meaning of the Constitution. A judge of the SC, as per Article 124(2), is appointed by the President after consultation with such of the SC and HC judges as the President may deem necessary. Instead, in practice, the judges are appointed through a collegium, a 5-member body consisting of the CJI and 4 senior-most judges. Consultation in the Constitution really means concurrence. Therefore, the opinions given by the SC and HC judges as the President may deem necessary aren't individual opinions, but institutional mandates. Who decided that? The SC itself in the famous second judge's case and third judge's case. The kings became the kingmakers. Second, the Supreme Court has given itself the power to strike down not only laws but even amendments to the Constitution passed by an overwhelming majority of not only Parliament but a majority of state assemblies throughout India, a procedure mentioned explicitly in the Constitution. It was held that certain changes cannot be made to the Constitution due to the fact that it has a basic structure that cannot be altered. Who introduced this basic structure doctrine? Yet again, the Supreme Court. When Parliament well as 20 states approved the NJC, a constitutional amendment to replace the collegium system. The SC declared it unconstitutional. The primacy of judges in selecting other judges, the top court ruled, was a part of the Constitution's basic structure. And because these two extra-constitutional powers haven't faced a serious pushback so far, primarily because of restraint on the part of the legislature and executive to avoid a breakdown of the three pillars on which the edifice of the state stands, judges seem to have internalized the my lords epithet, a tradition carried over from the unabashedly classist British era. It is that internalization which, it seems, found its way into CJI's speech last week. The tenor all but revealed that, out of the three pillars, one pillar looks at itself as the most important. The Supreme Court is supreme, indeed. But with that great supremacy comes great responsibility, to be cognizant of the boundaries within which the supremacy lies. The CJI's address does nothing to assure India of that. Border insecurity. BSF DG's remark on demographic change to justify a wider berth in border areas is flawed and disturbing. The entire border has been fenced and is secured by the BSF. In October, the Union Ministry of Home Affairs extended the jurisdiction of the Border Security Force, BSF, to 50 kilometers from the border in Assam, Punjab, and West Bengal, instead of the earlier 15 kilometers. It was explained as a necessary step to secure the three border states from the inflow of narcotics and weapons, facilitated by drones, and infiltration by terrorists. On Tuesday, the Director General of BSF, Pankaj Kumar Singh, said one probable reason for the centre's decision was that the demographic balance has been upset in border states like West Bengal and Assam over a period of time. Singh also added that there have been agitations in certain states and there have been many revolts because of the demographic change. Of course, illegal infiltration across the border is a security challenge for the BSF. But drawing a link between demographic change, political protests, and the need for the BSF to get, literally, a wider berth, frames a security threat in a manner that undermines the local police and the state government. The ruling establishment and its foot soldiers have frequently raised the specter of demographic imbalance, mostly by misreading or misrepresenting population data, to polarize the society and for electoral mobilization. The entire border has been fenced and is secured by the BSF. In the DG's own admission, the BSF wants powers to operate deep within Indian territory to stop infiltration. The Central Force's jurisdiction was extended in October only with respect to the powers of search, seizure and arrest that it currently has under the Criminal Procedure Code, Passport, Entry into India, Act, 1920 and the Passport Act, 1967. These are tasks that the state police are trained and equipped to carry out, which they do all over India. Instead, the central government has opted to deploy its own force, overriding objections by state governments, to engage the civilian population, a task it is not mandated or trained to do. The government weaponized the idea of demographic change by amending the Citizenship Act with provisions that discriminated against Muslims. Read with the National Register of Citizens, it was perceived by Muslims, particularly in Assam and West Bengal, as a tool of harassment. The protests against the NRC and CA were mobilizations against framing Indian citizenship in communal terms. That the BSF DG echoed the same disquieting refrain to justify the need to go deeper is regrettable.